The Viking Age podcast. It's the official podcast of the VikingAge.com. My name is Chris Schad. I'm a writer for the Viking Age Zone Coverage, Bring Me the News, and the Brookings Register. We do this every Monday with a late week episode right here on the Viking Age YouTube channel. We're also on podcast form on Apple and Spotify the very next day. But however you consume us, make sure you rate, comment, like, and subscribe so you never miss a new episode and we can spread the word to the masses. Today's guest, you can see him on the screen here. He is here to preview Sunday's matchup between the Vikings and the Detroit Lions to take a look at what the Lions could do in the playoffs. He is the host of the Pride podcast through Blue Wire Pods, and his name is Tyler Sawa. Tyler, welcome to the podcast, man. It's good to have you.
Thanks for having me, Chris. Looking forward to it.
I got to start out with this because the vibes, they got to feel immaculate in Detroit right now. You got the Lions winning their first division title in the NFC North era. Michigan is in the college football playoff championship game right now. The Pistons broke a 28-game losing streak the other night, so you finally got a win there. And the Red Wings seem to be in the mix for a playoff spot. Life's got to be pretty good over there, doesn't it, right now?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, for the last 5-6 years, it's been very brutal with our sports teams, especially with Detroit sports teams, with the Lions and Tigers in a crazy rebuild, and then the Red Wings were in a crazy rebuild, and then the Pistons have been doing what they've been doing for the last couple of years, and it seems like it's been pretty much the same thing. But like now, you kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel, like you mentioned. The Lions clinched their first NFC North in my first time in my lifetime, and the first time in 30 years. And for the Red Wings, yeah, they've been playing more encouraging hockey, been a little hot recently, and yeah, man, it's been good. And Michigan football, like you mentioned, they're playing for the national championship on Monday.
And of course, we are here to talk about the Lions, the first division title since 1990. The first NFC North title. It was the NFC Central
Right.
the last time they won. And the Tampa Bay Buccaneers were like divisional rivals. It's crazy because the first thing I want to talk about with you is how the Lions got here. Because like from a Minnesota sports fan standpoint, I was writing about this for zone coverage earlier today. The Lions were like the comfort food of the NFC North. Like every time you're feeling a little down about yourself, here came the Lions. Mike Zimmer needs a win to save his job. Oh, it's Matt Patricia's here. Kirk Cousins, he's a little shaky right now. Oh, here come the Lions for a last second comeback. That noon window, baby. 2021, this team was 3-13-1. One of those wins, of course, against the Vikings. But some of the notable names I picked up on a tweet you put out, reading the roster, you had Jared Goff, DeAndre Swift, Tyrell Williams was your wide receiver one.
Yeah.
TJ Hawkinson, hey, we know that guy.
Yep.
Trey Flowers, Romeo Okwara, Jamie Collins, Jeff Okuda. You guys didn't even have a kicker. So what's been the biggest turnaround with the Lions since 2021 that's turned them into legitimate contenders?
Yeah, I mean, I would say they've done the right things, right? And for Lions teams in the past, it seems like, they kind of try to hold on to what they had before and keep trying to build off of it. And it was kind of with the Stafford thing. I love Matthew Stafford. I think he's a phenomenal quarterback, but they just could not build a team around him. And it was like a weird window where when you have Stafford, you're good enough to not get a good draft pick, but you're not bad enough to get a good draft pick, but you're not good enough to be a contender. And when Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell took over that Matt Patricia roster, like you mentioned, and Bob Quinn roster, they essentially stripped it all apart and, traded some assets to get some capital back. And I mean, right now it's working out really well. That Matthew Stafford trade has worked out very well for the team. I would say, obviously, for both teams. I mean, the Rams won a Super Bowl, obviously, with Stafford, and then the Lions were able to acquire so many pieces back in that deal that led them to this moment to win their first NFC North title ever. And, they just stripped it from the start. And, there were some brutal years in 2021 and, even the start of last season. But finally seeing that lights at the end of the tunnel, finally winning the NFC North, finally being the conversation at the big boy table and saying, hey, we have a shot in these playoffs this year. It's really refreshing. It's really cool to see all that, losing and all that wasting your time, you could say, for 3.5 hours every single Sunday. It's kind of paying off finally for the first time, and it's really cool.
What do you think the end of last year did for this team? Because they started 1-6. Dan Campbell was on the hot seat. You win 8 of your last 10. Vikings fans were thrilled that you knocked the Packers out of the playoffs. That was
Yeah.
probably one of the biggest highlights of the Vikings season, was seeing them go down. How did that set the tone for where they are now?
I think a lot. I think that's just learning how to win because like it was breaking narrative after narrative. I mean, at first when Dan Campbell was here, is like he couldn't win a road game. I mean, in his first year, didn't win a single road game, and then obviously during that 1-6 stretch, didn't win a single road game. So it took all the way till late October and a win in Chicago for Dan Campbell to pick up his first road victory. Okay, so you break that narrative. All right, let's go make it back-to-back road wins. And so they go out to New York and win that game, and they just learned how to win, man. And I think it's really important for a young football team that hasn't won much, like you have to finally, beat that barrier. And they did that last year. Now, all Lions fans obviously wanted to make the playoffs, and we were that close. Obviously, it came down to, pretty much the final week where then Seattle crushed their hopes when they won that game versus the Rams. But like we kind of felt it for the first time. It's like, okay, like we're actually there. And this doesn't feel fluky where it's gonna just be a 1 year thing and the next year everything's gonna fall back to, pieces because we've seen that with the Lions team before, like in 2016, like, had a pretty successful season, but fell apart at the end of the season, losing the last three and then getting killed in Seattle in the playoff game. And then 2017 not being as great as a year. And then you fire Caldwell. This felt different. It felt like they were building something. Their young players learned how to win. And winning that game in Green Bay last year in Lambeau, even though they didn't make the playoffs and even though they technically had nothing to play for, I think was a very big confidence booster, just saying, hey, we could do this in anyone's turf or anyone's place. Doesn't matter if it's 1 o'clock on a Sunday or 8:20 on a Sunday Night Football, where the Packers have everything to play for. If they win this game, they make the playoffs. The Lions crush their dreams, beat a division rival, and I think they brought that momentum into this season.
It's funny you mentioned that, kind of looking at this matchup, and we'll get into the game itself later. Understandably, I'm not exactly thrilled about previewing this game because the Vikings, they have nothing to play for. Their playoff hopes are basically on life support. I think it's 3%. They got to beat, I can't remember what it was. I think I got it listed right down
It's
here.
that high. I'm shocked it's 3% because you guys are like behind a lot of teams.
Yeah, well, that'll happen when you lose 3 straight games.
Yeah.
I got it written down right here. The Vikings can get into the playoffs if they beat Detroit. They Seattle loses, Green Bay loses, and either Tampa Bay or New Orleans lose. So I think somebody, the Minnesota Football Party on the Locked On Podcast Network, looked up the actual odds for the parlay, and it's like a 33-1 parlay to hit on Sunday.
I guess it's not that crazy. I mean, Green Bay's playing Chicago's hot.
Yes.
Arizona's like a sneaky team. They could win versus Seattle potentially. And then you said, New Orleans plays who? The Falcons? Like that could go either way.
Yeah. New Orleans plays Falcons, and then Tampa Bay plays Carolina. So
Carolina, right? And you only need one of them to lose, right?
Yeah. So I mean, I think with that factored in, it's Atlanta beating the Saints, which I think is very possible.
Yeah.
I think that game's at the Superdome, or whatever it's called now. But I mean, looking at the juxtaposition, like a lot of Viking fans are kind of like, yeah, I don't really care. I want to lose this game or whatever. And you're talking about the Lions here, about how much that win at Green Bay, like the Lions, after Seattle knocked them out, they could have just been like, all right, let's get the draft pick. Let's get another guy. But I mean, Dan Campbell wanted to build his culture in year 2. It's kind of a very similar situation to what Kevin O'Connell's experiencing, except for the fact the Vikings have kind of flatlined to circumstances outside of their control.
Yeah, I would agree with that for a little bit. I think it's a little different just because I think what O'Connell took over was a little better situation. Like, he had a more, I guess, team to build now. I mean, like we just mentioned that 2021 Lions team with Campbell and Brad Holmes took over. It was, damn near an XFL roster, right? It felt like,
yeah.
I mean, a lot of those guys are not even in the NFL anymore, right? But like to a certain extent, yeah, I think it could be something new for you guys. I mean, because you guys have a big offseason, obviously, with Kirk being a free agent. So, yeah, I mean, I think it could bring some momentum. I think beating a division rival is always a good way, like, to end the season, even if you don't make the playoffs. Yeah, I know you said you have a 3% chance, but like, assuming all those scenarios don't happen, I think ending the season against division rivals is always a good note. I mean, even in 2021, we played a Packers team who already clinched the number 1 seed, clinched the bye week, and ended up resting their starters in the second half. But as a Lions fan, even though we won that game and took ourselves out of the number 1 pick, like, it was still a very good win, and it's still a very good feeling to beat the Green Bay Packers, even though Aaron Rodgers didn't play the second half, and David Bakhtiari didn't play the second half, and Devontae Adams didn't play the second half. It still felt really good being a division rival to end the season.
And here's the thing, too. You talk about that, and you're like, oh, man, we played ourselves out of the number 1 pick. We're not going to get Aiden Hutchinson. Well, then the Jacksonville Jaguars are just like, well, we're going to take Trayvon Walker instead. And like, you guys had to been like, are you sure? Are you serious? Fine, I guess. Yeah, we'll take Aiden Hutchinson. Like, it's like the Eagles taking Jalen Reagor ahead of Justin Jefferson and Rick Spielman and Mike Zimmer laughing at each other. Like, there's so much that could happen in a draft. And if you're cheering for the Vikings to win, like, the teams ahead of them have a pretty good chance to lose on Sunday. So, I mean, it's still kind of like, hey, if the Vikings win this game, it's not like, oh my God, they absolutely can't get an impact player on defense or can't get an impact player on offense. It depends on what them ahead of the draft and whether the scouting department can find some guys, because the Lions have definitely had luck in that department.
Yeah, I would say 100%. I mean, the thing for Lions fans that year was like, just get one of Kayvon Thibodeaux or Aiden Hutchinson, and then we had the option to both of them in our pick. We didn't think either. Yeah. But we thought like one of them. We thought we were just gonna get the leftover or whatever it was, and that was fine with us. But like, it was pretty cool. We had the option of either one, and it looks like both players have panned out to be pretty good players. So I mean, but yeah, for the Vikings, a little weird because you guys like are a solid team already. It's not like you guys are in a mix of a 2-win season or a 3-win season. Like, you guys are at 7 wins already and have an opportunity to win. What is it? Are you at 8 wins or 7 wins right now, I think?
7 and 9 coming into
7 and 9. So you have an opportunity to win a game, right? So like it's like, mediocre mid, like, right? But like, I don't know. I think it's a little different because like the Lions were like pretty much at rock bottom. I mean, that was a 3-win season and they didn't pick up their first win until I think December was when they beat the Vikings. Yeah, right. It was something like that. It was either late November or early December.
Yeah, that was the Amon St. Brown takeoff game.
Yeah,
where he had like nothing coming in, and all of a sudden he had like 10 catches, 100 and some yards, and that walk-off touchdown. And yeah, that was effectively the end of the Mike Zimmer era. That's when everybody said, all right, we got to do something here. And it is funny you mentioned the one difference between the two teams is like the Lions at this time last year felt like they were building something, like they were progressing. The Vikings feel like they're going in the opposite way, or even worse, just staying at that same direction, because you mentioned this too when you were talking about Matthew Stafford. The Lions were bad, but they weren't bad enough to get a top draft pick, but they weren't good enough to be a legitimate contender, which is kind of the Vikings have lived in throughout their existence. But you trade your quarterback, you make a couple of moves, and you took a contender. And lo and behold, it only took you 3 years to do it. Like, this sounds very familiar. Like you talk about how the Vikings have pieces, but everybody here is screaming about Kirk Cousins. And like, oh my God, we got to keep Kirk. Look at how bad things got with Nick Mullins and Josh Dobbs. What do you think of Kirk Cousins? And like, should the Vikings keep him? Should they stay the course? Should they move on? Like, what would you do if you were the Vikings GM right now?
The Viking situation is just so weird because you guys have talent. So it's like hard to click a reset button like the Lions did. Because the Lions, I mean, they had talent, but like once Patricia kind of ran out most of the talent, like Darius Slay and Quandre Diggs and all those guys out, like when Brad Holmes took over, there wasn't much talent. All he had to really deal with was the Matthew Stafford situation. And I think for the Lions in that situation, it didn't really make sense to keep Stafford around because, they weren't ready to compete in 2021 with Stafford. So it wouldn't be fair to him. And it just made sense to, click the reset button. And even Lions fans, when it happened, I mean, they were like panicking, saying, oh, look how we lost the trade. Look how Stafford's balling in LA and look how bad Jared Goff looks here. So it could look bad at first for sure, right? Like if you move off of Cousins and let's say you give the reins to some bridge quarterback or you gave the reins to some rookie quarterback. I've seen it go both ways though. Like you could start a rebuild and it could go how like the Lions have gone and it works out and you are in the big boy conversation. Or it could work out in a situation where you trade off all your young talent or you trade off all your veteran talent and you don't get the right guys in the building. So it really comes down to the evaluation and draft and different sport, but like comparing it to the Pistons, I mean, the Pistons completely reset and stripped their whole roster down. I mean, look where that has led to us. We
Yeah.
haven't led to much winning, They've tried the draft route. We've had lottery picks for the last, 4 years now? We've even landed the number one pick with Kate Cunningham. And like they are still in that hole where they can't even make themselves relevant to like get into a play-in tournament. Like they're not even close to that. So like I've seen it go both ways where it could go like the Lions, you could reset and you bring the right guys in the building and you could be ready to go in 2 or 3 years. Or, you're kind of in that weird situation where you just keep on rebuilding where you have to rebuild the rebuild. And those are really, really bad as a fan, I'll say.
This is where the difference between the NFC and the AFC comes into play. Because, like, the AFC, when you're building a team, you're like, oh my God, we got to beat Patrick Mahomes or Trevor Lawrence or
Right.
Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson or all of these big name quarterbacks. In the NFC, it's an arms race. It's all about the supporting cast. The number one team in the NFC is the 49ers. Brock Purdy's a good quarterback, but he's elevated to another level by George Kittle, Christian McCaffrey, Deebo
100%.
Samuel, that Kyle Shanahan, that entire defense. Like the Lions with Matthew Stafford, they basically looked around and said, man, our supporting cast is like, we have nothing right now around him. So you deal him, you get Jared Goff, who obviously has filled in that role nicely, but like you said, it took some time, but you get, I'm going to butcher this name, Fitu Melifonwu.
Ifeatu Melifonwu.
Thank you.
Call me Iffy.
Yes, I was going to put the pronunciation on there, but a little behind the curtain, I forgot what time we were doing the podcast. So I like rushed everything and threw everything together. You get Jameson Williams from Kwesi trading within the division, Josh Pascal, Jahmyr Gibbs, Sam Laporta, and Broderick Martin in that trade. Stafford has a couple of years left. He wins the Super Bowl with the Rams, but you guys get your core to compete. And like you said, this doesn't feel like a flash in the pan Lions team. This feels like a team that could compete in the division for the next 3 or 4, maybe even 5 years and even build down the road.
Yeah. I mean, like for our expectations coming into the season, like where you are, like I would say in like the conversation where like people are talking about like the Lions could do some damage in the playoffs. But I think the realistic expectations coming into the season was let's finally break that narrative and win the NFC North the first time. And let's host a home playoff game for the first time in Ford Field history. Because the only Ford Field playoff game has ever been a Super Bowl was between the Steelers and the Seahawks. So this is the first ever home playoff game for the Lions.
When did Ford Field open?
2002 or 2001.
So yeah, I was in high school.
Yeah, so something like that, right? It was around those years. And yeah, so like coming into season, yeah, it was win the NFC North for the first time, and they have accomplished now. Now we asked for a playoff win too, so we'll see what happens next week. But like anything other than that, this year is pretty much like house money. Like it's extra credit, I guess you could say. Like everything else past that is great. But now for next year and the year after that, like that's when I think Lions fans' expectations come into like it's not Super Bowl or bust. Like that's when now we're in the like legitimately in the big boy conversation. If they do anything more than a playoff win this year, like I said, I call it house money, I call it extra. But next year is like when we're really getting to that big boy conversation. And that's something that Brad Holmes and Campbell built over the years to kind of put them in that position. So, yeah, it's not just a 1 year thing where if it's a Super Bowl, we're not going to like, flip the city apart if they don't win it this year, right? Like they have a time window to win. And I think it starts from now all the way. Like you said, it could be 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. I mean, the NFL is so weird. It could change so quickly, but that's what we're kind of expecting right now with Lions fans, I feel like.
Your expectations are sky high. And over here at the Vikings, I'm sitting here going like, what if they finished in last place? Like, wouldn't that not be, because that would be the ultimate wake-up call, right? Because the Vikings have just been like, we want to win. We want to be super competitive. We want to be in the hunt all the time. They accomplished it this year. But you look at the division and it's changing. You guys have your solid core. The Packers have a young nucleus that's starting to form. The Bears, I mean, yeah, they're the Bears, but they have $60 million cap space, and they're probably going to draft Caleb Williams. The Vikings have Kirk Cousins singing to Kelly Clarkson at the NFL honors, probably a duet with Taylor Swift in a couple of months, and Justin Jefferson, and not a whole lot else. So, I mean, I don't know if, maybe that last place finish would be enough to kind of jar the Wolves into going like, hey, we tried to push and be competitive and everything else, and we still finished in last place. Granted, Kirk Cousins popping his Achilles didn't really help, but it's almost like there's part of me that just wants that wake up call, and not to tear it down to the level that the Lions did, but just take a step back, get that franchise quarterback, maybe even have another 7-10 season and really take off with that cap space and that rookie window in 2024.
You sound so much like me and my other teams with like the Pistons and the Tigers, dude. I say the same things all the time because like the Pistons before, like now they're just straight up bad, but they used to be the same thing like the Vikings, where they would be always mediocre with the Stan Van Gundy era. It's like they're always flirting with that 9th or 10th seed, or maybe you slip in as the 8th seed, but they're just killed by the 1st seed. And it's just like I just want a wake up call, like just lose, just rebuild, start over. I'm sick of this. And same with the Tigers, dude. When they had Alavila, it's like just stop this. I'm sick of trying to win the Central, even though it sucks. Stop trying to win the Central. Now it's a little different, but before it's like stop. We're not there.
You know what the ultimate side of that is too? Like when you're so mad at your team, you just flip on like Madden or something, just start reading. Yeah. I'm gonna trade Daniil Hunter and I'm gonna trade Dalton Reisner and I'm gonna get rid of everybody and burn it down and build it the way I want it. Like that's just, you know, we can yell and scream online all we want, but there's nothing like flipping Daniil Hunter for 4 first-round picks and going wild and mad.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, like I said, it's a tough situation because the Vikings, like I think, have talent. It's just it's in a weird window. It's kind of feels like the Stafford Lions a little bit. It's like you guys are good, but like you guys are like you're good, but you're not bad, but you're not great. You know, it's just weird and it sucks being that window. I know exactly how it feels when we had Jim Caldwell and from like that era. It's like we were just the epiphany of mediocre. Like we could never get over the hump, and that's why we fired him and tried Matt Patricia and it didn't work out. And we led to where we are now. So it's all good.
But you guys have better posture after the Matt Patricia era. Like
100%. Yeah. I mean, yeah. I think we needed a complete blow up. Like we needed something just to kind of like kick our ass a little bit, saying like, okay, like this is just not good. Let's restart.
Oh, no. I was referring to the press conference where he I think he stopped and he's like, hey, you're slouching. You just give me this. And you know, just the rest of the NFC North, especially Mike Zimmer, loved Matt Patricia because he usually just torched him on a week every time they met up. But yeah, definitely a dark era in Lions football. Hey, let's talk about a brighter era in Lions football, which continues on Sunday. The Lions hosting the Minnesota Vikings at Ford Field. The game will kick off at 12 p.m. Central Time on Fox. Joe Davis and Daryl Johnston will be on the call. Lions are favored by 3.5 points, according to the Action Network. Lions can move up to the 2 seed in the playoffs with a win and a loss by Dallas and Philadelphia.
Don't even mention the 2 seed Lions fans right now. It's not worth it.
Yeah,
we lost all hope after Saturday.
Are you? I'll ask you this. So if you're locked in the 3rd seed and you get the Rams, are you afraid of the Matthew Stafford revenge game?
I mean, like a little bit, but I feel confident. Like I feel confident that we can match up with anyone in the wild card round because it looks like it's going to be the Green Bay or LA. I feel pretty confident with either of those matchups. Truthfully,
it is funny because you know, when you play an old player like that, you look at him and be like, oh, he's not that bad. I know all of his flaws, and then he'll come back and play like the greatest game of his career, and you'll be like, where was this? Where was this? Andrew Wiggins, where was this?
I love Stafford. He's my favorite quarterback of all time. I mean, it would be like it would hurt very badly if we lost that game to the Rams. But like, I think at the same time, though, if we won that game, I think it'd be like you just kind of burn that pass a little bit, and it feels kind of good. Like, and I think it'd feel good for Jared Goff, you know, like beating Sean McVay and beating his former team. Like, I think that would feel really good for him and bring some confidence for the rest of the playoffs too, if that were to be the matchup.
Now, I did a little reading before we came on, and Dan Campbell said something about he has controlled fury going into this game. What does that even mean? Because I feel like that's something somebody would say before, like blacking out and causing a disturbance at a Wendy's or something. I don't really know. Like, how did that Dallas game kind of affect your psyche coming into this week?
A lot, man. I mean, I don't know. Like you kind of mentioned earlier, like my interest level in this game isn't as high as the previous ones, just because like it feels like we're pretty much just locked and loaded for the number 3 seed, and like we can't really do much to change that. But like that Dallas game meant a lot, man. Like if we win that game, we control their own destiny to get the number 2 seed, which would make this game a whole lot different from the Lions. But now it's like you're asking for the what ifs, kind of like what you guys are doing now. Like you're asking for other teams, and then like it's just not the same when you're asking for other teams to do other stuff instead when you can control your own destiny. And the Lions had that opportunity, and it felt like it was just completely robbed against them. I mean, we don't have to go back and talk about that game, and the whole national media saw what happened in front of everybody. It sucks, but you know, I hope that they could use this motivation. I feel like they are going to use this motivation going forward. I mean, you hear from Dan Campbell, the controlled fury. Yeah. Like, I think they're going to use this as extra motivation. It's like, okay, we're going to go in and just like, we can't let the game come down to the referees. Like, we're going to just go out and take care of business so the referees don't even have to involve themselves in the game. So, and I'm interested to see how the Lions team responds after a very emotional moment in Dallas.
If the Vikings were to pull off an upset, how would they make it happen against the Lions?
I would say obviously limiting the turnovers. I think that was something that really caught the Vikings off guard in the last matchup, but time of possession too. I think the Lions really dominated the time of possession last game and kept the Vikings off the field. So the Vikings could establish some type of time of possession. The only problem is that the Lions' run defense has been very good this year, and the way that offense has been picking away the Lions, and you guys did a pretty good job at it, was passing the ball, because our secondary obviously is a little bit lacking right now. So yeah, I mean, I would say time of possession is the way to go. If you guys can control the time of possession and limit the turnovers, I think the Vikings have a shot. And I think it's gonna be interesting to see how the Lions really handle this game. I know they said they came out and said they're gonna play their starters, but I'm curious to see how much they play their starter. Like, is it going to be all 4 quarters for Jared Goff? It's going to be all 4 quarters for the offensive line. Like, I'm curious to see how they actually manage their players going into the game, because obviously, like we said, they need a lot of what ifs to get that number 2 seed. And they have obviously a bigger game next week, I would say, as you know, they can't clinch the bye anymore. So, you know, you're guaranteed to play a wild card weekend. So you have a big game next week. I think that is more important than, you know, this game particularly versus the Vikings.
Yeah, and I think, you know, kind of looking at the Lions standpoint, maybe they just want to kind of, you know, Greg Coleman always used to say, the old Viking sideline reporter, kill a mosquito with an axe, you know, bury the Vikings. And then, you know, if you're in the third quarter and you're up by a couple of touchdowns, you know, pump the brakes a little bit, get the backups in there and get ready for LA or whoever the Lions might match up with. What's your prediction for Sunday's game?
Like I said, I really don't know what to expect. I could see us losing this game, honestly, just because I don't know how they're going to control their players in this game. Like, if it ends up being a situation where they only play the first half and the second half is all backups, I mean, I think that completely changes the game. Like, this is the weirdest game, I think, to really, like, predict or bet on, honestly, just because, like, you just don't know what to expect. I think that's just how really it is in Week 18 for the most part, especially the way the Lions are handling it, because, like they said, they're going to play their starters, but, like, how much are they going to play their starters? So, I honestly, truthfully don't know what to expect. It kind of felt like I said that game 2 years ago when we played the Packers, because the Packers already clinched number 1 seed and they decided to play their starters. But the same thing, we didn't know how long they were going to play, and they ended up playing the first half. Played pretty good versus us, but then the second half, you know, we did a pretty good job versus Jordan Love and ended up winning that game. So I could see something like that maybe happening in this game for the Lions, like where the Vikings get a little second half surge and maybe even end up winning that game.
You got a score?
Oof. Let's go. I think first drive's a touchdown. The Lions are gonna come out with the touchdown first drive because they have, you know, they're gonna be pissed off. So I think first drive's a touchdown. Let's go 24-21.
Oh,
let's go Vikings. I don't know.
24-21 Vikings. Okay. So the push for the playoffs is still coming alive. We're going to end the season with Kevin O'Connell in the locker room. Like, you know, 4 months ago, we set out on this journey to win 8 games. And because we reached those 8 games, I am giving everybody in this room a game ball. You get a game ball. You get a game ball. The janitor gets a game ball. The parking, everybody in the city of Detroit gets a game ball from Kevin O'Connell. And they fade in the background into the long off season.
Well, maybe, you know, we'll make the 4 o'clock window interesting for you guys now.
Yeah, exactly. I look at this team and they're tired, man. Like, I think like that's the best word you can describe everybody associated with it. Like, I'm tired watching them. Like they start 1-4, they battle their way back. Kirk tears his Achilles, they win a couple of more games. Justin Jefferson comes back. Nick Mullins has shoot to thrill blaring in his head at all times, just chucking interceptions everywhere. Like I'm sure, like in the building, Kevin O'Connell's like, hey, if we beat the Lions, we got a shot. We can still get in the playoffs. But like you look at him in his press conference earlier this week, that guy looks like he has not slept in a month. Like he's just sitting there, just like answering the questions, doing the best job. Like I feel like if they lose this game at the end, it's almost like the end of Avengers, when Iron Man is dying and he's like, oh, you can rest now. Like, don't worry about it. You can sleep. I just see the Vikings just getting manhandled in this game. And I know it could be weird with the second stringers in there, but like I said, this team is just mentally and physically drained at this point. I'm going to go bold. I'm going to go Lions 37, Vikings 17. I don't have faith anymore.
It's going to be interesting. And being a fan being a fan of a team that has played a lot of useless week 17 and week 18 games, this is when the crazy stuff happens out of the underdog teams. Like this is where the Lions would always pull the crazy triplets. I'm like, oh, why couldn't we try that like week 7 or week 8 or something like that? You'll see some reverse passing where like Golden Tate's throwing a touchdown pass, or in 2021 it was Tom Kennedy throwing a touchdown pass. Like we see all the crazy plays open up. And maybe like the Vikings just want to go off on a bang, open up the playbook. They're not really expecting playoffs, but if it happens, great. Let's just go off with a bang. Let's open up the whole playbook and let's catch the Lions off guard, man. And let's have some momentum going to the offseason. I could see that happening in this game.
I'm excited for the CJ Ham fullback pass.
There you go. Yeah, no, there's going to be some craziness in this game, 100%.
Let's see what Kevin O'Connell can dial up.
Or maybe you guys do a fake punt against us. We're the master of the fake punts. Maybe you guys throw a fake punt at us.
There we go. We had one against Denver. It worked. Ty Chandler had I think it was a 30-yard gain on one. So we'll see what Kevin O'Connell can cook up. Hey, if the Viking fans want to follow a playoff team, though, and let's just assume the Vikings aren't getting in, where can they check out the Pride podcast?
Yeah, I mean, we're pretty much in every, podcast platform, if that's Apple, Spotify, iHeart, wherever the hell you listen to your podcast. We're pretty much on all of it. So yeah, you can just look it up, the Pride Podcast. We're also on Instagram and Twitter, same tagline. So that's where you could find us. And, obviously we have some exciting content coming up. We're excited for the playoffs, obviously. And, just can't wait to, finally dive into it. Cause we've been doing this since 2018, and this is our first time ever covering the playoffs. So we're looking forward to it. It's gonna be really exciting.
And where can people follow you on social media?
You could find me on Instagram at _Lions Nation _ or you could find me on Twitter. My first and last name, Tyler _ Sawa, SAWA.
Well, thanks for coming on the show today, Tyler. We appreciate it, and good luck on Sunday.
Thank you, Chris. You as well, guys.
That is all the time we have for the Viking Age podcast today. We do this every Monday with a late week episode right here on the Viking Age YouTube channel. We're also in podcast form on Apple and Spotify the very next day. But however you consume us, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe so you never miss a new episode and we can spread the word to the masses. For Tyler Sawa, I am Chris Schad. This has been the Viking Age podcast.